And on the way, we did have some of us that were eaten by wild animals.
Matthew is one of about 3,500 South Sudanese in San Diego, part of a worldwide diaspora. In January, many in the community cast their votes in the independence referendum. Chul Tut runs San Diego's South Sudanese Community Center.
I was born in the war and grew up in the war, and now is the time to vote. That means it's going to be my last bullet for that war.
Refugees who came to the U.S. from South Sudan did not have an easy time. When Agnes Olwar arrived 17 years ago, America was far from what she had imagined.
When I got there, it was one-bedroom apartment with 5 or 6 guys, roommates, then plus me and 2 younger kids in one-bedroom apartment. And you can imagine how can we live like this. You know, there is a lot of drug dealers going around. There is a lot of shooting going around. So I tell my husband, I wish I'd go back, live in refugee camp other than, because I was scared all the time.
Now she's the proud owner of her own hairdressing business with a child in college. But South Sudan beckons. Even though they've spent years making their lives here in the United States, many South Sudanese say they're eager to return to their homeland and help build a new country.
When the peace comes, all those people will be going back to Sudan, and they will come with a skill, whatever the skill they have, to bring that nation. That will build up the country. I have to go back and do whatever I can for those people who need the skill.
Matthew Riek, who now has a master's degree in public administration, wants to work for the new government.
One could be thought of as crazy if you want to go back there. But for me, you know, having gotten to where I am today, especially with the education that I've gotten, I feel like, you know, I would do a disservice to my country where I was born, you know, if I don't go there and do something.
Agnes Olwar, too, is ready to leave the relative comfort of life in California for something deeper and more meaningful.
I really want to go back and help out. And also we have like a lot of family that has been scattered all over the world. I wish one day we can just go back and be as family one time. We can have a place we can call home.
Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, San Diego, California.
Let's recap our top story. Pro-democracy protests in Egypt entering their 14th day. Demonstrators camping out in Cairo's Liberation Square. They continue to call for the end of President Mubarak's 30-year rule. Well, the government has made more concessions after sitting down for talks with opposition groups. But the Muslim Brotherhood, the largest of the groups in attendance, says it doesn't trust the administration to follow through on promised reforms. A senior member of the group told this show moments ago that the organization will be reviewing its decision on whether to continue those talks. We'll have more news at the top of the hour after Inside Story. Just a reminder, you can keep up to date with all the news, of course, by following our website, aljazeera.net/English.
It's been almost 2 months and the Arab world is still on fire. The trigger was December 17th in Tunisia and then Egypt on January 25th. For several weeks, demonstrations intensified, morphing from economic grievances to governance and corruption. What are the real differences between both revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt? What are the possible ramifications? And how would this impact on shaping the future in both countries? And finally, does people's power actually work? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Divya Gopalan. When asked about the uprising in Tunisia, the Egyptian Foreign Minister Ahmed Abu al-Gheit said this is pure nonsense, adding that Egypt is in a completely different position compared to Tunisia. But events since then seem to prove him wrong. In both countries now, the old regime has made desperate attempts to survive by offering unprecedented concessions, perhaps in an attempt to neutralize the revolution. So let's now have a quick look at the similarities and differences in the situations in Egypt and Tunisia. Both countries have seen dramatic rises in the cost of living in recent years. There are accusations of corruption among the ruling elite. Many protesters in both Egypt and Tunisia come from educated middle class. But scratch below the surface and you will find marked differences between the two countries, such as the role of the media. Until the fall of Ben Ali, Tunisia had a strictly controlled media with severe restrictions on what could be reported. The press in Egypt had a bit more variety, although the state exerted pressure on editors and journalists in different ways when needed. The role of the internet. Unlike Tunisia, Egypt had a less restrictive approach to social media, such as Facebook and Twitter, leading up to the revolution. Tunisian protesters have been forced to rely more heavily on cell phone text messages and word of mouth. And finally, the role of the army. In Tunisia, the army played a crucial role in the revolution. The military never gave its backing to the president, but in Egypt, the military is still sitting on the fence. Well, joining us now are our guests. In Tunis, we have Fida Al-Hamami. She's a Tunisian activist, and she's been a regular guest here on Inside Story since the beginning of the revolutions of both Egypt and Tunisia. In Sydney, we have Gennaro Gervasio, a lecturer at Macquarie University in Sydney and a visiting professor at American University in Cairo. And in London, we have Yusuf Elbaz. He's representing Egyptian activists in the UK. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Now, if I can start with you, Fida Al-Hamami, and I want to ask you to bring us through what Tunisia has achieved so far. You've had the protests, you've had a change in government. Where are you now?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me again to the show. And I want to greet the protesters in Egypt and say that we in Tunisia support their fight for freedom and democracy. As for Tunisia, well, we had won a lot, but the road is still long. The government seems not to have understood its people yet. We had the change in the cabinet due to pressure, due to the sit-in in front of the First Ministry. But there are a lot of things that are still remain unsatisfactory, like appointing governors for the internal towns that are ex or still RCD members, that is the Ben Ali's party, that really exhausted the country.
If I could bring Yusuf Elbaz in. Now, you've been watching the protests very closely in Egypt and have been active to a certain extent. How far has Egypt come?
We started in the process just like Tunisia did. We wanted to get our message clear and heard that the current system of governance of Egypt through a single person, a dictatorship, was not acceptable, and we needed fair and free elections and the right of sort of freedom of speech and so forth. But what we have learned from our Tunisian brothers and sisters is the need for a deep cleanse. What we saw in Tunisia was a two-wave revolution. It started with a populist movement and then a second populist movement to make sure the government understood that a change in the top echelons is not sufficient. A deeper cleanse was required, and thus a more sustained change in the government ministers, which is what we saw when some of the old ministers retained power. And in Egypt, we're doing this today. We've pushed harder, and we're going to push again to make sure that not just the National Democratic Party resign, but we see the full regime and system that's sort of woven itself into institutionalized corruption in Egypt is removed.
Dr. Gennaro Gervasio, what we have seen here in Tunisia happened at great speed. But if you look at Egypt, there was a certain amount of movement, and now there's somewhat of an impasse. Why is that?
I mean, the Tunisian uprising and the way it went, and also the way that it was, I mean, at the very beginning successful, particularly when Ben Ali decided to leave the country suddenly, it had a huge impact in Egypt. I mean, I remember I was in Cairo in those days, and the Egyptians were following almost obsessively the way events were going in Tunisia. And I remember the media, of the state-run media, they were very quick in dismiss any similarities. And I remember an op-ed written just maybe 5 days before the beginning of the Egyptian demonstrations. And I remember this person, the editor of Al Ahram giving 5 reasons for which they will not be repeatable, but in fact they were both, all these 5 reasons, they were enough to have the Egyptian situation inflaming, if not even more, or far a quicker pace than the Tunisian one.
Fida Al-Hamami, bringing it back to leadership, can you tell us what the process is now from here? Why are people still protesting there?
Well, because like our friend said, we need a cleansing and eradication of all symbols of oppression from our government, from our Tunisia, our free Tunisia now. This didn't happen, not with the old cabinet and not with the new